some jazz today. Yes, you gon' learn, you gon' learn, you gon' learn. It was just past 1, 2, 3 man with a 4, 5 step to the door like, oh my gosh, just throw that cash in a backpack, run around the back.
Hey everybody, it's Liz from the Lemon Bowl.
Vince from Irie Kitchen.
And welcome to the Irie Lemon Podcast. Before we get started on this week's episode of the Irie Lemon Podcast, we want to tell you about a couple of fun events coming up.
So guys, you're in the city, Grand Rapids, Michigan to be exact. On the 22nd, Trevor and Madcap and myself are doing a dinner. It's irie.madcapcoffee.com. For tickets, please come out and check it out.
Don't worry, I got my ticket. I can't wait. And on the 26th of September, if you're here in Grand Rapids, I'll be hosting another event with DJ AB at One Bourbon. The menu, One Bourbon, 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. Get there early because for the first hour, we will have some fun drink specials and some complimentary food.
Talk about your $5 cocktails.
Blackberry Thyme Smash. It's really tasty. A lot of you have had it. It's on my website, the recipe. And it's really refreshing and delicious. And for the first hour, it'll be just $5. So grab your tickets. If you head to the Lemon Bowl on Instagram, you can find the ticket URL, hit me up, ask for it, whatever you want. But you should get a ticket early because they are 10 in advance and 15 at the door. So, and you can hang out with me and Vince. It'll be fun.
And guys, I've been there. They're super fun.
Gotta go.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Irie Lemon Podcast. This is Vince.
This is Liz.
And we have Trevor on from Madcap. We're going to talk about branding for the B in our alphabet series on entrepreneurship and business.
I'm ready for it. I'm excited.
So Trevor, please introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. My name's Trevor Corlett. I'm CEO and co-founder of Madcap Coffee Company, founded in 2008 and relevant to Grand Rapids. I'm currently serving as vice chair on the board of directors for the Local First as well.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
Awesome. Thank you for the coffee this morning.
You're very welcome.
It's really good. I needed it too.
I know, I did.
I know. I feel like I should have brought one for myself too, but that would be my 3rd cup. So
already?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Okay, that's an interesting
just
question. How much coffee do you think you're drinking a day? And does it have the same effect? Are you just like have a tolerance to it now?
Yeah, it doesn't do anything for me,
you.
which is actually bad because when I need something to wake me up, it's like coffee's not going to help me.
Right.
Usually food or something, you
Yeah.
know. But I start every morning with a single shot of espresso, a single shot macchiato, and a cup of coffee.
That's a good start to a day.
That's what So if you come into Fulton around 8 a.m., that's usually you'll see me there with a spread in front of me.
So do you ever drink coffee at home?
Okay. Only. You know, if on the weekend, if I'm not going into work at all, which when I'm trying not to go into the office at all, I use a coffee pot. I don't very often. I try to make it the easiest way possible now, after 20 years in coffee. So I still, I go camping. I take my own grinder and I'll do pour overs when I'm camping. And
that's cool.
then you always get scared when 10 people are hanging out around the
course.
campsite. Let me get some coffee. It's going to be a while. But, so I still make coffee at home.
Curious question, do you only drink your own coffee at home or do you test other coffees? And is your coffee your favorite coffee?
So often, my coffee I'm drinking at home is usually I take the old stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we pull stuff off if we have stuff.
Because you probably have to do that quite often.
Yeah. To a certain extent, we'll have product that we don't leave it on the shelf after 2 weeks, and so I'll take some of the old stuff home and drink it because I think it's still. It's not the same, but it's still delicious. Mm-hmm. So that's usually what I drink at home, so we're not wasting it. But I try other people's stuff all the time too. So I've got some coffee from a coffee roaster in London right now that I'm actually drinking at home, just randomly. I hadn't tried their stuff in a while, so I ordered it. It's from Square Mile Coffee Roasters. Is the name of it.
So do you guys communicate like the other CEOs in the coffee space?
It's a pretty small world.
Yeah. Do you guys all text each other hey man, I had it. Your chocolate's off in this. Or dude, amazing. How'd you do it?
Well, it's funny that you say that because I was at a coffee event in Richmond, Virginia over the weekend and was hanging out with a guy who owns he's co-owner of a coffee company in Durham, North Carolina called Black and White Coffee Roasters. And the two founders are both were former U.S. barista champions.
Oh, cool.
And so, but he and we have a good relationship. He used to use our coffee in some of the competitions he did and stuff like that. But our goals are sort of the same, but the way we come at them is very different, like in terms of style and the coffee that we like and sort of flavor profiles that we're into and stuff. So we spent most of our time like over dinner, hanging out, or over beers, arguing in a very healthy way. But
I bet that's pretty cool to interact with people that are equally passionate, but there's more than one right way to get to.
Yeah, very much so. And I think what's cool is like too, it's really interesting. It's really easy for us being here in Grand Rapids and having multiple locations now to sort of get in our own bubble. And so it's nice to be able to have that extended community. And the reality is, like, I've found in all my travels, like, people are all dealing with the same sort of challenges, whether it's Grand Rapids or New York or Durham or London or wherever. Like, the coffee culture at sort of the level we're working at is very similar. And so it's really fun to see how other people are like approaching their challenges. And we're all competitors to a certain extent, but at the same time, I mean, our core values are very similar for a lot of us, you know, and it's relational, and we're trying to, you know, help develop and grow and support coffee farmers and things. So in that sense, we're all coming to it from different angles, and it's pretty cool to become very sharing while at the same time still being competitive and talking trash to each other and stuff.
So why don't you tell people that might not be familiar with Madcap how you got started and perhaps what the inspiration was?
Yeah, and why coffee?
Yeah, why coffee? Like, why coffee for me? These are a long story. No, the 30-second version. Yeah, so I grew up 45 minutes south of Chicago originally, and I moved out to Grand Rapids for school. So I was studying business computer information systems at Cornerstone, and did 3.5 years of school and dropped out of school to pursue coffee. And I fell in love with coffee for the reason I sort of, when I'm consulting, I tell everyone not to do it if that's what their motivation is, which was I didn't fall in love with the product. I fell in love with the culture and community around coffee and coffee shops, right? And so I had a roommate who was a musician at the time and traveled, and so there weren't a lot of coffee shops in Grand Rapids at the time worth writing home about, but in traveling and playing coffee shops, which is what people used to do back in the 90s, fell in love with sort of the community that existed around it. And so just, it's very much my personality, but I just like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm doing this. And so, that sort of started my journey. I dropped out of school, got convinced a startup coffee shop and music venue in Indianapolis to hire me. I worked there for 1.5 years. Really wanted to do my own thing, move back home. I had 2 failed coffee businesses in Illinois.
Oh, interesting.
So one was a drive-through coffee roastery, and that lasted about 1 year. And then I had another cafe where I roasted and had that one for 3.5 years. So I learned a lot through those experiences, and really those kind of helped define and sort of shape what Madcap became. So when I started Madcap in 2008, I actually, 3 of my employees from that location who had been working for me as college students, because I was really close to a university there in Illinois where I was at, they all followed me out here.
Oh, wow.
So one of those people is my business partner now, Ryan Knapp. And so his passion, like, we definitely like are very different human beings, which has made it work.
That's
really
probably
well.
what makes a strong partnership.
Yeah.
So what are some of those differences?
You know, he's super hyper intentional and loves to overthink everything, too, which I guess I do too, but more so, you know, is a little risk adverse, and so wants to like look at all angles of a thing, and I'm just like, if my gut feels, if it feels right, like let's do it, right?
And he's probably more analytical.
I connect with that.
Yeah. And I think we both what's interesting is the things that we both have in common, but also just, you know, then in the same way very opposite, because I'm also like, you know, there's always a better way to do something, and I'm always looking for that. I'm not very content very often, to a certain, you know, in a positive way, if you can say it positively. So I'm always looking for like a better way to do something, and have learned sort of, I think, through my failures, and then continue, you know, in an ongoing basis, like, hey, we're not going to get this right. We can always do it better, whether it's, with people, whether it's structure, whether it's whatever those things are. And so I think those things combined, and then, and then the core values are just the same, where it's like we're just really passionate about, working directly with our producers and finding a way to, coffee from the ground level is going through a lot of challenges right now that most of the world doesn't realize exists. And there's a real serious threat that coffee won't be around in the next 20 to 30 years if things don't change. And you got climate control, you got, producers being underpaid and taken advantage of, and there's so many challenges that revolve around it. And so we love the challenge of like, hey, this is a thing we love the people growing it, and we want to find creative ways to support them and also provide what we think is some of the best coffee in the world through those people. So so that at our core is like what motivates us every day. So whether it's the cafe, whether it's the brand, like that's where our motivation starts, is at that point.
Why don't you go back for a second? You say you had 2 coffee failures. What made you go back into coffee again for the 3rd time?
If you ask my wife, she'll tell you how stubborn I am. And so
you think after the first time you're like, all right. I get the second time. After the second time, it's kind of 3.5 years, you said, right?
Yeah.
Well, 3 times the charm.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. 3 times the charm. And I don't know. Part of it is like the worst thing for me is when someone tells me I can't do. I mean, even Grand Rapids when we started, like nobody wanted us here. Nobody thought I should open downtown. It's 2008. All the storefronts were empty down there, and so all of those, I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to open here. I'm going to open downtown. I don't care what you say. We're going to only have one size drink. I don't care what you say. You don't need to be a fat American. It'll be fine. And so, I don't respond very well to like those challenges of like you can't do something.
You probably want to do it more. When people
I do. That's what's worse, right? So it's like one sure way to get me to do
like
something.
You
just tell me I
someone,
can't do it, and
right.
I'm going to do it anyways. But so I think that was part of it, and I think too, each of those businesses, right? The first one I had, I mean, similar situation. It was just way before its time, and having this drive-through business in a small town south of Chicago. I didn't know what I was doing. Like I was trying to figure it out from a product perspective. And so the other business actually, so it was a unique situation, one where, partnerships are interesting, and I had found a partner who financially was like, here's a check, I believe in what you're doing, like do it. And so a guy cut me a check, we split the business 50-50, and I did everything. The problem, and we were successful out of the gate, but it looked like any other coffee shop. It's like, we had 20 flavored syrups, we were doing paninis, and like, we had some delicious Pillsbury scones that we were cooking in the oven, right? And we were doing live music then too on weekends, and it had a huge college demographic and was open till midnight and checked all the boxes. We were making money in the first year, but then the more so the other thing too, like when I decide I'm going to do something, I become a little obsessed about it. And so I kept researching coffee and trying to learn more about coffee. I'm like, I'm going to be good at this. And the more I started learning about coffee, the more I became sort of dissatisfied with what I'd created. I'm like, this isn't unique. This isn't special.
Your standards were changing.
Yeah. And there's opportunities here to improve. And then it got to the point where I started doing some when you start like shrinking the menu, buying more expensive ingredients. And my business partner suddenly started paying attention, who was not involved at all. I was like, whoa, what's going on here?
Right.
Why are we messing with this? This works. Don't change anything. And so it created a lot of conflict, and it didn't end very well. Like I tried to buy him out, and
so there's pros and cons to having
so I learned a lot through the experience, both in like from a business perspective, the things you need to do, one, to protect yourself and what you're trying to create, and the creative process and everything around that. But also I had to come to terms with like having built a thing for 3.5 years, and then in the end I decided to walk away. So I just walked away from it. sort of like, well, I did this once, I can do it again, kind of epiphany I had one morning sitting in a basement roasting coffee. And so, but then it became about like surrounding myself with the right people and just, finding a team and because even initially when we started Madcap, I was trying to do everything. And I was doing the website and I was doing packaging and I was, I haven't roasted coffee since, I was just telling someone this story the other day. Ryan got married shortly after we opened and piggybacked a buying trip to Costa Rica to meet with some farmers with his honeymoon, so took his wife with him, and they had their honeymoon while he was buying coffee. And so while he was in Costa Rica for 2 weeks, I roasted coffee, and I was like, all right, man, I'm done. This is all you. Take it. But yeah, my focus, and I think at its core level, my focus and passion really is in the retail side. But now we're too big for that in that sense, and so I'm really trying to take trying to figure out what it means to be a CEO, and which I'm still, most of my time now, a lot of it is focused on trying to be better in the business sense and create a sustainable structure for growth moving forward. And the coffee part we sort of have on lockdown, right? And so that part is easy for me. I have lots of great relationships around the world with people who I always kind of know what's happening on the coffee side, and I don't have to try to stay in that network. And so trying not to be a result of like the entrepreneur who's great at starting a company but not great at maintaining it.
Right.
So I'm not really interested in, in the growth. There's opportunities to live out that sort of entrepreneurial spirit through continuing to grow the business and develop new things. And so we're always working on, project with you all, different things where we're collaborating with other people, and we've been building a tech department. We've got guys that are rebuilding espresso machines right now that we're reselling to people.
And you have more food program, like with it.
Yeah, food program. We're experimenting more and more. We did a collaboration with Long Road earlier this year where we did a coffee amaro with them, and just trying to really stretch the creativity and access that we have to other things that parallel with what we do.
Yeah, but you make a good point that there's ways, to kind of scratch that itch of being an entrepreneur, trying new things without necessarily hopping business to business to business.
Right.
So you said that it was really important that you had to build the right team. And I know that's something that we both relate to as business owners. Growing and building your team is the only way to grow. So what's some of your best advice for how to build that team, or maybe lessons learned or success stories, or what tips do you have for finding the right team?
Yeah, the big thing, I've realized it more and more recently, when you're small in a startup too, right? And like both Ryan Knapp and myself, like as founders, we sort of, one of the things I've realized in hindsight I do really well is sort of like living the vision of who we are and what we do. And so for a long time, having approached things very organically, the vision was just sort of like, when we had one cafe and the roastery, it was really easy to live the vision and not really have to worry about whether it was, I had a really hard time, like in one sentence, like give us what your vision is. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than one sentence, which does a disservice to us as we've grown, like the ability to communicate those things and communicate the company values and like what are important. And in a lot of the research I've been doing in terms of like creating a very stable organizational structure so that as you grow, like one thing that's been very important to me, it was funny, I was doing tours of our cafes recently with someone from out of town and who works for another coffee company on the west side of the country, and we were going around from cafe to cafe, and in each one, like I was interacting with the baristas, and he's like, dude, do you know all of your staff? I'm like, yeah, I do. And that's really important to me because other companies that I've seen similar to ours who've started out small and grown, and then seen the natural sort of growth and structure changes that happen, and then suddenly the guy that started it's really disconnected from the person on the front line, ringing people. Yeah, and so I don't know how sustainable it is long term, but at this point, like, so I do every new hire that we have, no matter what position, whether it's in the kitchen, whether it's in packaging in the warehouse, whether it's a barista in the cafe. I currently do the company new hire orientation. So it's just, they have to sit with me for an hour and I just ramble about like how Madcap started,
Right.
why we exist, what we're motivated by.
Well, that's probably a good reason you have such good retention, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, and I think what we've realized is defining what those core values are as a company and then using that to like, because too, the challenge has been that as a company too, you change. And when you're growing, the hardest part with growth has been trying to, sometimes we outgrow, sometimes people outgrow us or we
Right.
outgrow
Vice
them,
versa.
which has been really, really was a challenge I did not anticipate having. And
it's probably not a very fun part. I just had to
No.
let go of a 7-year employee, and it's my I didn't start my business for the HR side of it.
Right.
The hire, I don't really love hiring. It's a lot of pressure to find the right person to fit your brand, and yeah. So I mean that's probably it's not a very fun
Yeah,
part.
and we've
of
had it happen quite a few times now over the last like 3 to 4 years where like, and I think too, and part of it is really realizing that with the growth, being more intentional about how you, because and part of it's just societal norms too. Like, oh, if I'm not moving up, then I'm not doing well, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this mentality.
I'm not valued.
Right, and what we found out has happened is that people will admit to like, oh yeah, I would love the opportunity to do that, and then get put into a role, and it's like, well, they don't really love doing it that much, but they saw that as an opportunity to keep
Right.
growing, right? And so we've been having a lot of conversations lately about like, hey, we want you to like, let's just have really honest, open feedback about. We can see what we think you do well, but we also know that there are things that people love to do, and we can't. Of course, I'd love to be able to just say, oh, whatever you love doing, that's what we're going to be able to put you in, right? And there's a certain balance between just like
Yeah.
knocking it out and having to do work that you don't know. I get stuck doing a lot. I look at P&L sheets a lot. I don't really love doing it, right? But it's a necessity
Every time I
for
go through a 15-page contract,
Yeah, it's like,
oh,
this
is not
is
the price
awesome.
that I signed
Yeah,
up
no.
for. Yeah.
But a balance between two, knowing that like I've seen enough in the past where when you get someone in a role and they're not really happy and it's really sucking the life out of them, then there's a ripple effect
Oh,
there,
yeah.
and it's
The culture.
become and it becomes more and more obvious like when you're like talking about 50 plus employees,
Right.
where it's like the more we can avoid those situations, the better. So, so it's really been a lot about having values set and like, do we agree on these things? And so now what we're trying to do from start to finish is like in an interview process, just driving home, like if any one of these values don't resonate with you and make you feel uncomfortable, then you won't be a good fit here.
Right.
And trying to catch people on the front end of like, this is who we are, this is what we're going to be, these are what our expectations are.
So really strong hiring is really the key.
Yeah, and then holding ourselves accountable too to like, hey, these are the values we set. Am I
You
living
fit
them?
into
Are
it.
you living them? Yeah, and so so we've just been making a lot of trying to be more intentional about communicating those things well out of the gate, and we haven't done that well in the past, and so try to avoid doing people a disservice by like catching them and us off guard with like those types of things. And so, and what's maybe it's not interesting. I think it's interesting that, and because I do a lot of consulting now, and the cultural piece for most businesses is like a complete afterthought.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right. It's like
I'm
what
sure.
what are you going to do? What is your company going to look like? What are your staff going to look like? How
And if you don't
what
have
kind
a
of
strong culture,
environment?
how can you hire correctly? And how can you, that's really the crux of it.
And also, like, for each business is like a persona and identity, right? So, like, in my opinion, what I've learned through my process too is like, definitely don't hire out potential. Like, if you're an optimist like me, and I think any entrepreneur, like, we think a lot of people are like us. Like, of course you're like me, 100%. So you're gonna be like, oh, you're gonna jump into here and want to be better, and like, you resonate on that a lot, but that's not actually the case.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you hire out potential, or you think someone looks like the part, and like for
And then
me,
you become resentful that they're not as driven as you. And that's not
Or-
really their fault either.
No, yeah.
That
and
was
like with businesses, 100% culture. You talk about growing, and it's funny because like I see a lot of businesses that like, like I'm still super small in staff and what we do, and it's like, I mean, of course we probably have another person, and like, but also I'm like, I look at P&L sheets too, and I'm like, yo, like, I'm not gonna hire a person. But I think a lot of people have like this viewpoint of like, if I'm not growing in this fake check mark, like we're not gonna name any names, but there's coffee shops that I know that shouldn't have multiple shops in our city that do have multiple shops in our city, which are now closing shops in our city. And it's like you have to be very, very intentional and careful with your brand and your culture about just because you open another shop as Madcap doesn't mean I need to open another shop. Right. And it's like these like weird like conversations about like how do you grow, because I'm not really consulting, but I feel like I give out free consulting. If you always ask me like, what should I hire somebody else? I'm like, bro, like when you think it's like the right time. like why, like for what? Why give someone more money for no reason? Are they gonna take something off your plate, or can somebody on your team step up into another role? And I think you touched on something very powerful about like people wanting to move up for this fake title, which doesn't mean anything. So it's like, you know, like if you're HR, janitor, or the CEO, like what my pops has taught me, he's never owned a business, but he said each role is very important. There's no really hierarchy. That's like society.
Well, when I worked at Marriott International, you know, Fortune 500 company, if you weren't promoted every 18 months, you essentially weren't valuable. So literally every 18 months I'd be promoted, and that was my first job out of college. So I just assumed that's just the norm, because I remember there were times that I didn't want to move up. I was like comfortable, like I'm starting to get good at the job. Just when you start to get good, they want you to do better and be in a bigger role, right? And start over. And I just remember being like, why do I have to move up? But there are aspects in the corporate world where, you know, but that's so different. That's a huge Fortune 500 company. It's very different.
Well, it goes back to process and systems. When you get that big, you just kind of like people like your manager, I'm assuming, realize that like willingness to grow and get really good at something versus like struggling and not trying to get good at your job. Right. So like, oh, she's willing to learn and restart and she's coachable. So we're gonna keep putting her up until she has her cap. That's what I would assume. Yeah. That's what I would probably do in like a big company. Like, oh, this person go back to like hiring off your personality. If you're just like someone who wants to grow and get better, well, that's a great management role position. Let's put you in that kind of track. If you're very intentional and like detail oriented and like have a great smile, you should be customer facing. And like, I think like what I've learned is like, let's actually look at who you are as a person, not what you aspire to be. Because, and I think in our culture right now, everyone's trying to be somebody else.
Aspirational.
Right? Like literally, like there's that quote like I always say, like everyone else is taken, just be yourself. But like, how many people want to be you? And it's like, no, you don't really want to be me.
And you can't train
you go
the
home.
aspects of it. There's things you can train and things that you.
And there's value. Like I think, you know, it's surprising. I mean, we have a handful of people on our roastery team who've been with us 7-8 years. Like they're behind the curtain. People don't see these people, and they're like super content and they're crushing it and they're roasting like some of the best coffee in the world. And like these guys have been with me for like 8 years. You know, and they're just back there doing it. You know, I've got my whole sales team right now. We have 3 salespeople. They've all come out of our cafe. They've all worked in our cafes, right? And so, you know, and they know better. We just added a new salesperson. So my former Fulton Street manager, who, you know, she came to us initially like overqualified, like graduated, I think business management from Purdue, competitive swimmer, and like we. Even initially, we're hesitant to like, why are we going to interview this person for a barista role? Like, this, you know, doesn't seem like it'd be a good fit. You know, she interviewed well, like brought her into the team. She, within a few months, moved into the management role of the space. And just that Fulton space, like if you've been in that location, like you've felt her energy and presence because it just radiates like that is her, right? And so and now we moved her into a sales role.
I know, I kind of miss seeing her.
And she's definitely,
that's always like the bummer. I remember even when I would get promoted, you know, the current managers, well, we don't want to lose, you know, there's that whole it's a win to one and
totally.
It goes back to that personality, like competitive swimmer, like she's willing to grow and get better, and like that's the difference. And like I always tell people that like want to work with me, I'm like, do you have that? Especially in the startup phase, right? You're a small business, so you pass like 40 million in America. So like, you know, if you want to be part of something bigger and you want to not just be a cog in the system, like you have to have that DNA, and it can't be taught. Like you just have to naturally want to stretch and grow, even though it can be difficult. Like, you're gonna have tough times, but competitive people or people who are just naturally like that are down for it, or at least down to take the swing. And I think that's way more important versus somebody who's like hesitant or someone who's like judging from the sidelines. There's so many people I know that like can talk so much. Like, do you haven't played the game though? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's so easy to be like, oh, if I have the ball, like, but you don't have the ball.
I mean, that's the thing about having cafes too, is inevitably there's a customer coming in there telling you, well, if you did it this way, like,
sure.
Yeah, okay, sure,
Right.
thank you.
Isn't that's my favorite. I love it when strangers on the internet give me advice. That's why
All the
my
time.
notifications are turned on.
Which leads to my next question, talking about brand now. Let's circle back. What's the branding difference between like a coffee shop like yours and like a Starbucks? I think a lot of people
that's a great question.
ask me like, why don't you just go to Starbucks or Big B? Why you always go to Madcap? And I'm like, well, I don't know, he tried the coffee. But like, tell me from like your how would you explain the
Easy
difference?
on Big B, my good friend owns town.
Shout out to Big B and shout out to people that own Big B. I'm not trying to ruin Big B. I'm just saying.
What's up?
There's probably a place. What are your thoughts? Like, I assume there's, in my mind, like, there's a million food bloggers, but I don't feel necessarily like threatened. I have my own niche, right?
Sure.
And that's why I feel I'm successful. So what is your thought on the competition, and of course, from a branding perspective?
So branding is one of those things too that I think it took me the process through my failures, and even after we started, and it was something that I didn't even have a budget for when we started, and that's why I was doing everything myself.
Most of my clients still don't have budgets for it.
Right, and no one budgets for it.
No one budgets for it.
And so now realizing, like, very quickly realized the value, but thankfully, with cool people in Grand Rapids, and I just happened to have customers who were coming in like 3 or 4 days a week because their office was down the block, who one day were like, who does all your like design and branding and everything? I'm like, yeah, I do it myself. I don't have much of a budget for it. And it was like, oh, we love what you guys are doing. Like, we'd love to be a part of like helping you guys with that. And let's just talk. So go and meet these guys and see all their stuff in their office. I'm like, there's no way I can afford you guys. And 30 minutes later, after a long conversation, it's like, hey, we'll do stuff for coffee. Like, let's barter is great. Let's work something out. And so everything that you see about our brand, from its core, the logo, the packaging, that was all developed in the first year under their tutelage, and was inspired by who they knew. So the great part was their customers. They understood in conversations with us what we were trying to do, what we were passionate about, what our core values were, and what we were trying to communicate. And so I think the design itself everything about it is crazy intentional in terms of trying to communicate subconsciously the story of what motivates us and what our passion is. Now, of course, unless you have a conversation with us or you read some of our journals online or something, you may not like get that communicated. But also the realization, like, in your question about like comparing, one of the things, I have a great respect for larger companies. Like, it's really easy being in maybe a more specialty market or a more elevated sort of thing to look at some of the larger like corporations and things like that and write them off instantly. But also they're successful for a reason. And so how about we be more open-minded and look at what they're doing successfully and say, hey, how could we apply this to our business model? Yeah. And so Starbucks does, they're a lifestyle brand. I think of them less as a coffee company anymore and more of a lifestyle brand, and they do that really, really well. They just built a new location, Starbucks Reserve location in China. That is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life.
I've seen
Yeah, I gotta check that out.
It's amazing. It looks like a coffee temple or something, man. It's crazy. But they do those things really, really well. In the circles I'm in now, like, I've gotten to interact. I've served on a board of directors with the VP of marketing for Starbucks. They're amazing human beings. They've built some amazing teams. They've got good people, and they know how to do certain things really, really well. And they have the resources to do so. We don't have the resources to do so we have to be a little bit more creative. But I mean, I think even, Big B has a very specific target market, and they're they have resources to focus on how to, accommodate that target market. And so we live in this space where, again, we're trying to tell this story. And I think even our packaging, like the logo itself is on the package is fabric, right? Mm-hmm. And so you pick it up and it's something you don't know until you pick it up and you experience it and you touch it. And it's this intentional component that speaks to a craft, the craft side of what we do as an industry, that you don't know it until you've picked it up and you've touched it and you've interacted with it. And that's sort of an allusion to or a nod to how we want to engage people with coffee. We want people to interact with us. We want to engage people, because the reality is just coming in and ordering a cup of coffee from us, you just want a regular coffee. We've gotten better at we want to appeal to those people too. We want to have something for those people too. But what we really want is for someone to come and sit down at the bar and engage with us and find out hey, our staff, in order to make you that coffee, have had 8 months to a year of training before they're allowed to serve you that coffee. They know everything about that coffee. They can tell you everything about it. And stuff you don't want to know about that coffee, they can tell you, right? And so, that's their components, everything. The color labels is super intentional. And that actually stemmed from a conversation I had with our designer about trying to find creative ways. So when we first did our menu, we used to have this chalkboard up on the wall at Monroe where we wrote stuff on. But what I noticed when I was working, 100 hours of bar shifts a week was that people, when we intentionally had no size options for a cup of coffee. So the only option you had was which coffee do you want. That was intentional. We wanted them to focus on the coffee, not worry about what size they were going to get. Well, the problem is that when you have some of these exotic names, right? Your average West Michigan person is a little intimidated in trying to pronounce it, so they're going to order the easiest to pronounce, or they're going to just give me your cheapest coffee, give me a regular coffee. And so, not wanting that to be a dissuasion from how they ordered, I talked to the designer about how could we differentiate the coffees, and we came up with this idea of color labels and assigning. So every time we release a new coffee, it gets assigned a Pantone color palette that my designer and Ryan Knapp work on together, because Ryan knows the coffee, the producer, really well. They look at flavor profiles. So even Reiko's lime green yellow label is because of the lemon lime citrus characteristics of that coffee and floral characteristics of that coffee having inspired the colors for that coffee. And so and then we've had that, I forget now, 8 years we've been selling Reiko, and every year when that coffee's back in season, that color comes back and instantly people recognize it for what it is, right?
Well, packaging is such a huge, it's kind of like wine. When people buy wine, it's incredible. So many people, like you said, are just drawn to the packaging, which is interesting as someone that you've put a lot of thought into what's inside the package, but...
Yeah, and so I think too, there's a real, we had a lot of conversations when we had started 11 years ago that we want everything that touches the coffee to be as intentional as the coffee itself. And so, packaging, how we serve it, the other ingredients we put with it, milk, where does it come from? When we started, I discovered Mooville Creamery in Nashville, Michigan, and they weren't delivering milk to Grand Rapids at all at the time. And I had to convince them, I'm going to buy this much milk every week. I will buy. We bought extra fridges that we put in the basement just because for them to do one delivery a week. And then next thing you know, they're doing 3 deliveries a week. 5 other coffee shops in Grand Rapids are suddenly using them, and now it's they're everywhere now. Coffee shops in West Michigan use Mooville Creamery. And so, but again, finding a family that was passionate about milk, their kids are all, at Michigan State studying agriculture and studying about milk. They adopted a lot of their processes from the Amish in terms of trying to use as little mechanical pumping as possible to maintain the structure of the milk. And just everything about it was oh yeah, these are coffee people for milk.
Right.
This is
similar.
Awesome. And so everything from, the vanilla beans that we use for our vanilla syrup. And I mean, everything is thought to the 9th degree, 10th degree, because we're trying to, show the same level of respect that the producers have shown for the coffee. And so most of that gets lost until we have the opportunity to sort of share with people, like, how things are built and why that chai tastes the way it does. Well, we made it from scratch. Right. We sourced all the ingredients separately. We make it.
Talk about the Cafe Miel. So, quick story. I'm somebody who was not into coffee. Before I started doing Irie, I was doing another business, and we pretty much always worked inside coffee shops. So, I started experiencing all the coffee shops, and like me as a person, I'm a watcher, I'm an observer by nature. So I started watching like coffee shops, and the craziest thing is I saw your brand in every single coffee shop. So like, and this is like obviously 3 or 4 years ago, before you guys started growing, which I found graphics to be super funny about. But I was like, Madcap. So everyone's serving Madcap coffee, but these are different coffee shops with different brands. So I was like, all right, cool. Madcap coffee must be this like really good coffee brand. But now in my brain, I'm thinking California, New York, or Chicago. I'm not thinking it's a Grand Rapids company. Because I know nothing about coffee. I'm not really paying too much attention. I just see the Madcap coffee. And I'm still trying to get into coffee. So I'm like, I'd rather drink water or I'd rather drink tea. And then like everyone's like, you taste the chocolate? No, I don't taste the chocolate. You know what I'm saying? Like it just tastes bitter to me. And as I started going to coffee shops like every single day, obviously I started getting more and more coffee. I remember Lion Street was like my go-to. Always was there, right? And then I think it was one day I was downtown, I went to your Monroe location, and I sat down. It was like super hipster, and I was like, oh, this is not for me. Like, they're probably kicking me out, like, and say something weird to me. But they didn't. They were super nice, and I did work. And then I remember having a Cafe Miel. That was my go-to at Lion Street. And I'm not throwing any shade, sorry, Alex. This is not really bad. But I had the Cafe Miel at your shop, and I was like, wait a minute. This is way better. And I was like, that's crazy. Like, why is it way better? They use the same coffee.
Yeah. And
then that's when the person, like, again, like, they did the over-explaining, like, well, no. And then you're like, okay, these are people that really care about what they're doing every single day. And I'm that kind of person as myself. Like, I'm intentional, I'm authentic, and I care about stuff. So I instantly...
You're making, like, homemade curry spice blends.
Exactly. So, like, for me, I was like, all right, I'm going to start coming to Madcap. And one thing I observed with your brand, which I, like, admire, is that, like, I watch it again a lot. Is that you see the first time someone comes in and they drink a cup of coffee, and you see the second purchase, what I think is amazing about your brand. They come back and they'll take a bag. Because you look at other coffees right now, you go to like a Bishop Market or Meyer, it's very unappealing from the brand standpoint. Like, it's just like either doing black and white or doing some crazy color, whatever. Then you see your brand, right? And it's like, I think it's super smart that you guys have the different colors. It instantly always stands out. Now, obviously, I'm looking for it because I know you guys. But I remember even like bringing people that don't know your brand, and they'll see that lyrico or whatever, and be like, oh, they'll instantly grab that one. And to me, like, as someone who wants to get into product in the future, I'm like, that's super interesting how a color palette or putting the logo here or using fabric, like those little minute changes that most people will be penny pitching on, because they're trying to make the most profit in that first buy. They're not thinking about the LTV, the lifetime value of a customer, the retention rate at all. It's like, man, that little fabric piece is like, that will just change. Like, someone who picks this up for the first time and just feels this, like, they're gonna keep buying it. Right? And so especially someone who cares about brand and design. Now, obviously, like, your non-target market, probably not. They're just looking for like the $4 or cheaper, whatever.
What is your target market?
Well, so,
I know. I mean,
it's a huge question.
That question?
Well, but there's so many spokes to what we do, because we have the retail side and then we have the wholesale side. Okay. So I mean, we have 300 wholesale accounts throughout North America right now. We've started getting a lot more traction in Canada recently, and so there's different spokes to that wheel for sure, right? I think and this answers part of like where your story started, but we did not. So part of the challenge initially when we started was that we were so passionate about the product, and initially I was like, all right, we did all this work. Like, I was coming off of like 2 failed businesses. I'm like, this is what we're gonna do, and like people are gonna like it, right? And people hated us. Like and we weren't, we wouldn't let you put espresso over ice when we started. We weren't going to give you cream for your coffee.
I remember the no cream.
This is like, don't disrespect my farmers. This is what you're going to do.
I remember them telling me, they were like schooled me on it.
Yeah, so we've grown up. So the realization that, like, one, we don't do there's no value in alienating people. And I think it took us a while to realize, like, wait a minute, like, we can still have this personal passion for the people that are growing the ingredient, but also create an experience where, like, if you're going to have a coffee with cream, we want that to be the best coffee with cream that you have. We want this to be the best latte or cafe miel that you have, right? And so, but the funny story about the cafe miel is that, so being like, how can we expand our target market to be that coffee drinker that just wants something? The challenge is that we've created these spaces that, we'll never, I want spaces that are clean, well-designed, intentional, and they're going to be defined as hipster more often than not, whatever that means. I have friends from Brooklyn who are like, people don't even know what hipster is. Like, they started in Brooklyn. It was like,
or Portland, I can see.
I understand. But yeah, so the cafe miel. So here's the thing about the cafe miel that's really funny. So at my business I had before that in Illinois, the cafe I had there, I had a customer who came. I had a bunch of sweet drinks, and this college student who had come back from, like, she studied in France for 6 months and came back from France and was like, hey, could you make me a cafe miel? I'm like, I don't know what that is. And she's like, oh, it's, when I was in France, they would serve a cafe miel, and it was a latte with honey, and you add a little bit of cinnamon, right? So, oh, yeah, I could do that, right? So made this honey cinnamon latte. And then when we opened Madcap, and we were trying to figure out, like, all right, we don't want to be about sweet drinks. We need to have a sweet drink for people. Like, 2008, West Michigan, people are going to order a caramel macchiato. What are we going to do? So we found a local beekeeper who we sourced honey from. We bought cinnamon that we ground ourselves, developed a ratio for a cafe miel. Like, this is the one sweet drink we're going to put on the menu. And when people ask for a caramel macchiato or whatever it is, we'd be like, we don't have that. We have this. Try it. If you don't like it, you don't have to pay for it. No one ever didn't like it. And so, but it just, it was just such a better, the coffee's, it's still present. You're not really masking it. The honey, nobody really thinks about honey with coffee very much, right? And so fast forward 11 years, and now you can't, I was just in Petoskey recently. I went to a coffee shop, and cafe miel was on the menu, and like, the cafe miel didn't exist until we opened 11 years ago, and now it's on every coffee shop menu in Michigan.
That's so interesting.
And so it's so bizarre.
I didn't realize
like
that.
That thing to me is weird. Like, that's the thing that people have, coffee shops have picked up. Like, that's the one thing I need to add to my menu.
You guys using Moville, right? It's the same kind of.
Yeah.
Like, if I feel like you trailblaze and you bring like a really cool brand, people are gonna pick up things, right? And like, Grampus is a funny city and how it works, and obviously you guys start growing and people kind of pull back up supporting you guys in that front, which I bet didn't really affect your business at all. But it was still like cool to see, like, once you start winning, like Founders wins, right? Now everyone has an IPA, right? It's just like the thing you have to do, right? And like people try to mimic it. Yesterday, Sam and I were talking. I said, for every Uber, there's a Lyft, right? So like people are gonna get that. Oh, cafe miel works. We care about coffee too. We have the same kind of core values. We need a sweet drink, and it's crazy to me to see, like, in 11 years your imprint where like all these Michigan-based coffee shops all have cafe miels. It's like, well, we 100% know where you got that idea from,
I just wish they bought our coffee too.
Do you have any branding mistakes that you've made or lessons learned?
Oh my goodness. I think, and we're always learning them, right? Like, I think our brand development right now is in such a weird place in the sense that I think we like putting out new product and especially trying to embrace more the realities of, like, we sort of have the ability to also, really like, how can we stretch this opportunity to be somewhat of a lifestyle brand as well, right? And in other products, in apparel and things like that. And so, so we, over the years, we've done so many different things in terms of, like, when our branding team used to, we used to do a lot of colorful stuff. We tried doing these like this summer design tank tops one year that was like neon pink and neon yellow and blue.
That's funny.
With like a script font over the Madcap logo. They didn't go very well. Nobody wanted a white Madcap neon colored tank top at the time. Although now my kids, we a couple of years ago we were emptying things out of the warehouse and we're like doing sidewalk sales and we're trying to get rid of those tank tops, and I ended up taking a couple of them home. So my girls are wearing them now. And then some of the other days like, oh, yo, are you selling those? Like, now I get it all the time. Every time they wear one, I'm like, man, don't wear it out because we're not investing in that again. But we've tried to do a lot of these products that aren't coffee that easily become distractions, which we're constantly now checking ourselves like, whoa, let's, where does this add value for
like
us?
when Starbucks
is it just something
toys.
fun to sell? Yeah, exactly. Is it just a fun thing that we want to sell because we like it and think it's cool?
Right.
How is it going to add value back? So we've put better checks and balances now, because too, apparel, you invest a bunch of money into it and now you got cash tied up in a warehouse that's like, you're not moving anything. And we made some doozies. We work with, so we thought it'd be really cool to do this like bespoke button-up shirt that was like a barista shirt, we called it. So like, we did a men's fit, a women's fit. We worked with this company in Chicago. The buttons are engraved with Madcap coffee and a lightning bolt on them. We have a little lightning bolts embroidered on them. It's like super custom. And $85 a shirt, no one bought them. No one bought them, right? I mean, we sold some, and it's like other coffee people somewhere. They probably serve our coffee at one of their cafes, and they bought one. I gifted them to all 50 staff one year for Christmas. Like,
Merry Christmas!
Which they were stoked, right? The staff loved them, but and we still have a bunch in the warehouse. It's like we just couldn't move them. Like people weren't going to come to us for that, right? It was silly. Whereas like we did do a collaboration with an old school. They do like 30s and 40s baseball felt hats called Ebbets Field in Seattle. Okay. We did a collaboration with them. 50 hats. They were $50 each. They had like a felt lightning bolt on it and Madcap on it, flat bill. Boom, we sold them in like 48 hours. They were gone. Wow. Right? So it's like, okay, that's interesting.
But that's why you have to you do have to try things.
Right.
So you do have to give things a try.
Right.
You probably couldn't necessarily predict that, obviously.
No, absolutely not.
So.
And that, so those things, like, of course, like you want people wearing our products out like that, like that's great marketing for us. There's no better marketing. But also we know that our two best-selling pieces of apparel that we can't keep in stock are our classic Madcap logo shirt, which is just charcoal black tri-blend shirt with the white Madcap logo on it, and the black on black t-shirt. Like those two items online in the cafes, they move. Like, do people wear them out and they buy another one? Like, what's happening? Like,
probably.
But yeah, so some of those things, right? And when we focus on what we do, like box sets, when we do different box sets of coffee, we did a Peru box set last year, or at Honduras, where we did 3 coffees from Honduras. We did a varietal set for a number of years, where 8 different coffees grown at the same farm. We did in a box set. We're inside little tins, like 50 grams each. And those things that we've done that really highlight the work that we're doing on the regular, like those things sell really, really well, and also help tell the story better than when we try to do some of those other things.
Which is a huge, I'm sure, win for you, because that's such a passion of yours.
Right. Yeah. So there's a balance, I think, between like finding those things that having apparel and doing some of these other fun things, like they're good and they help with it's marketing that but it can easily become a distraction when you're like, oh, we need to roll out, like we tried to roll out new t-shirts that were different designs and colors like every 90 days for a while, and then it was like, hey, this is silly. Why are we nobody is gonna nobody's there. We've got 5 customers who like every Madcap shirt that comes out, I'm gonna buy it. Everybody else like, I just need a couple. We're good.
My one I did my part. support you. No, we're trying to build a fashion brand, bro.
I know, right? That's the danger, right? It's like, all right, that's another business. That's somebody else's baby. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So, any final, maybe, branding takeaways? I mean, what do you think would be the, like, I don't know, what would be the best thing that someone listening here, maybe a branding lesson or a piece of advice for maybe somebody that's starting a new brand, or maybe the benefit of having a strong brand? You know, what would be some of your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would still go back to like really having a very like on paper, clearly defined mission, vision, like core focus and values, whatever you call it. Like you're not going to have a brand if you don't have those things figured out, and it'll be really disjointed. And I think, you know, using that as a lens for every decision you make, I mean, and that extends to not just your brand, but everything you're doing, right? In terms of hiring people and all the things we've talked about, like the product you're serving or selling or whatever it is, whatever business it is, having that lens, that filter to look at things is like,
It's really smart.
crucial. Because it'll, I mean, you want to take risks and you're going to make some mistakes and things, but I think you're going to eliminate the number of those that happen if you have that sort of piece in place.
It's really smart.
And then just being really intentional about how you're like communicating it and sharing it, and you know, partnering with someone who understands what you're doing. And I think that for us has been the real blessing is, you know, at every stage, whether it's been, you know, video that we're doing or photos or you know, packaging or cups or whatever it is, having someone behind the wheel from a design perspective who knows what they're doing and understands us and understands what our voice is and what it looks like, because, you know, that piece, it's very often, you know, I see other brands, especially other coffee brands and stuff, and like, I don't know that really tells the story you think it's telling, you know, and it's really, and I think that's the scary piece, right? Is like, you have to,
You're allowing
I'm not a
someone else to-
designer.
right.
I have to trust someone else to do that. And so finding, you know, doing the due diligence to find the right person to do that who has a similar value set, you know, even if there's someone you're subcontracting or whatever the capacity is, like build a strong relationship there with that person, and then trust them to do it. Because the best thing about the best thing about our relationship with our designer has been from day one when we started. It was like, all right, you guys know us, you know who we are. Like, come back with something. Tell us what it should look like and why, right? And so I think for them, it was just, I mean, regardless of how many other big clients they'd worked with, you know, and we're like small potatoes, and they're like, wait, you're going to let us do whatever we want? I'm like, well,
So
we can say no, but like,
right.
you're the experts. We're not, you know, we're not design experts. Like, you design it and come back to us. And literally the storyboard that came back was, I mean, the only thing missing initially was the lightning bolt wasn't there at first. And my feedback had been like, hey, I really, you know, can we add some sort of icon or something to this that will, you know, give our brand a little more flexibility and diversity moving forward? And the next time we sat down and met, the lightning bolt was there, and you know, he was just, I know, he's just like, you know, well, and to, you know, the big thing, because we have to deal with a ton. We're left and right having to protect our brand, and we have, you know, I'm trying to think, we've trademarked in 70 countries now, I think. The amount of effort we've had to go to and amount of money I've spent that we didn't have to protect, because then you get to this point where we're not a large company, but as we continue to grow, there's certain steps like my designer's like, if we don't say anything, if we don't send that person a letter, like, it will become an issue later, right?
Absolutely.
And so that has been the hardest part. And for some reason, you know, I mean, probably we're just at that stage. The last couple of years, we've just had a lot. I mean, I was probably sending a letter a month.
Yeah.
Like, hey, cease and desist. Hey.
But that's such an important, I remember when I trademarked, I mean, it's like you said, it's very expensive. It takes a long time. But, I mean, there was a brick and mortar in D.C. called the Lemon Bowl D.C. And it's also a benefit to them because they're not going to be able to get the trademark. And typically, any business wants to grow and eventually you become trademarked. Yeah. But it's you're doing them a service by letting them know.
And they're not going to want brand confusion.
Exactly.
And
it's
else.
Mutually, even though it's like an awkward conversation, lawyers, but it's really to their benefit as well. You know.
Well, and what I found was that in a lot of these cases, you had businesses or people or companies that had hired as a designer and expected the designer to do the due diligence, and they hadn't, right? And so our guys from day one, they like scoured the coffee industry. Does anybody have a
That's so smart. And it's not rocket science.
Right, it's not hard.
Right.
And so I think that's what surprised me every time I have to have a conversation, because a lot of times it's been with coffee businesses that we've had to have a conversation, and it's like, you guys, we're not like, not to toot our own horn, but we're pretty easy to stumble on, right? Like you can find us pretty easily.
You know exactly what you thought
so like Google, I mean, come on. So
I don't think that's possible because I mean I had the Instagram account already. You know, I mean it's like you said, it's not rocket science.
Right.
You know, I think people.
So working with so in if you're looking for someone to help, if you're working with someone to build your brand, like work with someone who isn't going to have to put you through that, right?
Exactly.
Because it ends up being expensive for everyone, right?
So I guess some tidbits for people on the other side. You're a creative or a designer. Do your due diligence. And I think you're touching on something very powerful because a lot of creatives come to me and like they want to do stuff, but like they've never been to my restaurant. So I'm like, it's hard for me to like really get behind someone who doesn't come or doesn't know our business, because like you're gonna give me something that's not gonna be right because you're looking for that quick check. Or that opportunity, that layup, and it's like, well, you don't know my brand or my business. I think you're like, the fact that this design company came and bought coffee every day, well, they kind of know who you guys are, and they kind of know where you guys are trying to go, and they kind of got the vision. Right.
It's like me hiring someone that doesn't already follow my brand, or it's hard to teach someone. Right.
It's like, what's the
hard
point?
to teach someone though about
or overly sell someone as like the client. A lot of times, like I'm very like not micromanageable, right? So I'm like, you just do it. Like, I'm not. If I was the creative, I wouldn't be talking to you. That's my personality, right? Like, if I knew it, I'm very not like that kind of person. Like, what do you think? I'll just do it myself. Like, I made my own logo and I did my own branding stuff too. So I and I'm not a designer. It took me weeks, months to make my little palm tree. And now, like,
look at you now.
Look at me now, right? And it's just like now, like people come to me like, we should change your logo. Like, I don't think so, because listen, I spent like 8 months trying to figure out how to like etch this out, and like you want to change it up, and like I'm too, I'm too connected to that 8 months of hard work or something I didn't want to do. So that like that for me, that's a lot of mental. So I do emphasize with like you're saying, like creatives like come in, feel our brand, and then earn the business, because it's like you think you're just so smart and you're so good, and a lot of times you are. But like if you don't know my brand, know my business, it's kind of like counterintuitive.
Yeah, I love using that though as a way to make all decisions, whether it's hiring somebody, making a new product decision, looking at your values. And I think to your point, a lot of people don't even think to have their mission statement or their values. It's like an afterthought, because nowadays everyone just wants to start a business every minute of every day, but they don't really do that due diligence first, which I think is a really cool piece of advice.
Well, and it's not like you're not. I think the important thing is too. Some people look at it and they're like, "Well, I don't want to commit to something." Hey, it changes. It's fine.
Yeah,
it's not a big deal.
Right.
Like you grow, you change. It happens. But if you don't have any launch point at all to start with, then you're just going to be sort of, and it depends on your capacity with how you work in it. But you're always going to. You don't have anything to hold yourself accountable either if it's not like
what to measure against.
And that's, I think, some of those earlier mistakes we made. Like if we had those on paper and we were looking at those, we'd be like, wait a minute, like I don't know, it doesn't check all the boxes really. Right?
There's a reason every big company has them like framed up on the wall in the background. As cheesy as it is, Marriott every day. Right. You walked in, you saw their mission statement, their value, the core values, and there is something to be said for that I think nowadays we sometimes overlook.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's been our challenge, is like that we've sort of embraced, is like, how do we find a way that's not just straight up cheese ball?
Exactly.
That like we are just like giving that speech to our staff, or like talking about these things constantly.
I think you've done it. You've done it really well.
Before you know, you see Madcap tattoos on people's like faces.
Right.
I know. Well,
are you down with the culture or not?
So
John.
you want a funny story about the lightning bolt tattoo?
Yeah.
So I'm in Richmond, Virginia this weekend, and I'm rolling with a team. There's 6 of us out there, and we're hanging out with a bunch of other folks, having dinner and drinks and stuff. And somehow the conversation all gets to the travel tattoos and when you're on trips and blah blah blah. And then a bunch of my employees are like, "Oh, we should get lightning bolt tattoos." And then a guy from North Carolina who works for another coffee company is like, "Oh, there's a tattoo parlor like a few blocks away from here." And all of a sudden, this big crew of us are walking down there. And then 2 hours later, 3 of my employees and 2 random people we just met from North Carolina all have Madcap tattoos.
That's so cool.
That's crazy.
Well, that's when you know your brand. That's when you know your brand's pretty strong when people are.
You thought about starting a tattoo shop outside the phone?
Yeah, I know, right?
That business thing anyway.
If that's not hipster, right? I'm not going to find the obvious.
Just checking the boxes, bro. So yeah, that was pretty. That was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. It's
job.
also a
You did
really
it.
weird feeling to be in this tattoo parlor and watch all these people getting your logo.
I can
tattooed on them.
imagine.
Imagine the person that's about to get
A little
fired.
bit of
though.
pressure.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
God, we're about to fire you next week. I'm like, fuck it.
It's been fun.
That's so funny.
We still love you. So I guess it's time to wrap up.
Yeah.
So this is episode 3. We talked about branding with Trevor. Tune in for next week's episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here. We
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks
your
for
time.
having me, guys.
Thanks for the
Great.
coffee.
Thanks for letting me be the letter B.
Yes, you got
Although
it.
I could be letter C as well. I mean, coffee.
Oh, that's
That's not where I thought you were going. I was like, what?
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.